Good morning.
Morning, how are you?
Not too bad, and you?
Doing all right. Well, just before you start your quiz, would you open your video? Leave that open, please. There you go, I see you. Good morning, Leah.
Morning.
Professor Dunning, do we wait for everyone else to come on before we start the quiz?
No, I'm okay if you want to go ahead yourselves.
Okay.
It's timed regardless when you start or finish, so you can go ahead and start if you want.
Okay.
Or wait. Good morning, Bogdan.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning, good morning.
Morning. Morning.
And as Janae, you're with us today. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. As soon as you're ready to go, just leave your video on and you can start the quiz anytime you want.
Good morning.
You can go ahead and start your quiz whenever you want. Gervais, you can go ahead and unmute your video and start your quiz whenever you want, please. Okay, I don't want to rush anybody. Is everybody done? Let's do it this way. Anybody not finished with their quiz? Okay. All right. Haven't heard from Ashley today. Does anybody, is that Caroline? Do you know if she's all right?
I'm not sure, but I could message her and find
Okay.
out.
All right, because we'll have lots of group work, so hopefully she can join us later for that. Let's see. So that was my first time giving an RVLE-based quiz, so hopefully it went well. That quiz was pretty typical of the level of difficulty that the other quizzes will be in the course, the quizzes I give anyway, and then it's also fairly similar to the level of difficulty of the questions that I submitted for your final exam in the course. When is that, by the way? I have no idea. Few weeks, maybe?
Not sure.
Okay, it's a long ways away. 1 week at a time, 1 day at a time. All right, all right. Let's see. You should be seeing the dental simulation website. I share the screen here. I wanted to show you, since I asked you to, you may not remember, but I asked you to register for both the basic game and the advanced game. So we're playing the advanced game, but the information that we're covering through the PowerPoint slides is the basic information. And so if you want, as I indicated before, your preparation for the final exam, if you study only the PowerPoints that are posted on RVLE, that's adequate. You don't need to do anything more. If you want additional information or more explanation than what's in the PowerPoint, for example, definitions and that kind of thing, log out, go to the dentalsimulations.com website and log in the basic program, not the advanced. You've all been using your advanced login credentials, but log in instead with your basic credentials. And if you don't have those, you can email me if you didn't write them down. I can email them to you. But I just want to show you so that you, if you want that additional information to back up the PowerPoints, additional information to supplement the PowerPoints, you log into the basic simulation. And when you do so, you'll be able to click this, which is basic instead of advanced. So you click that. And then you go to student material, basic, which is right here. And this gives you all kinds of supplemental information about each of the PowerPoints for each of the quarters that we're going to go through. We didn't do the PowerPoint for the first case one for quarter one because we watched a bunch of videos and went over other information. However, here is, if you want to look for supplemental information from the PowerPoint that Dr. Colleen spoke about yesterday, financial statements, how to use them, go to here, this material tab for that case two, or it's quarter two, and you click that, and then it just generates this PDF that you can download if you wish. So it goes over the same kind of information that's covered in the PowerPoint. Gives you short definitions for these items, and so it just explains them in narrative form as opposed to a PowerPoint more like bullet form. Same would be these cases you can ignore, just concentrate. These are each quarters. So this is quarter three, quarter four, quarter five, quarter six. And so, for example, today's PowerPoint is Office Financial Policies. And again, here's the supplemental information. Just click on Material. And so then there is the supplemental material for that, for the PowerPoint for today. So just to reiterate, what you have on the PowerPoint is adequate. If you want additional background information, let me walk you through that again. You would log in to Basic Simulation using your credentials, username, password, click Basic, and then go to the bottom, and then you can grab these supplemental short essays. They're kind of like little mini book chapters over each of those topics. We won't be covering, again, the first one, and we also won't be covering the last one, number 12, but for quarters 2 through 11, that supplemental information is right there if you want to use that. Okay, I should be sharing a PowerPoint for quarter 2 called Patient Financial Policies. Y'all got that? Okay,
Yes.
good. So each of the quarters from now on, as we did yesterday with Dr. Colleen, will have a PowerPoint, a short PowerPoint accompanying it. His from yesterday was longer than most of them will be. Most of them will probably be maybe on the order of 10 to 15 slides, maybe 20. And so we'll just go through this basic information about financial policies. I didn't include additional information about this. Again, the background information is under the basic tab if you want to grab that additional information for basic definitions and so forth. But in addition to that, we're also going to have a chapter quiz. I think it's the last, one of the last quizzes, either 4 or 5 during my portion of the course, and that's under chapter 12 in transitions, and that will address this topic in more detail than even the PowerPoint. So we'll just kind of go through this fairly quickly. If you have questions, please ask along the way. So the question here with financial policies really relates to what you're going to do in your practice to make financial arrangements for patients to get their care done. Will you extend credit to patients? Will you take credit cards? Will you set patients up on a payment plan? So suppose somebody needs an upper denture. Will you allow them to pay maybe 1/3 of that on the day that you take impressions, pay another third the day that you see that denture, and then be responsible for the balance within 30 days or 60 days? All those things are financial policies. I know that when I visited with Dr. Holmes's office, she had some flyers on her counter for patients to contact a local bank to make financial arrangements to pay for their care. So that's all a part of the financial policy that you would develop so that patients can afford to get the care that they need and pay for it. Most dentists collect a majority of the money that is owed to them. So you see between, if you add 31% and 18%, so that's whatever that total is, they're collecting like 97 to 100% of the amount that's billable after they make adjustments for insurance and so forth. And if you drop down to the next category, you know, the vast majority are collecting 95% or more of the money that's due to them. So that's a good thing for a business. Got to have cash flow and acquire the money that is owed to you. There are several treatment decision points that patients make in seeking care from you. They have to trust you and believe that you're looking out for their best interests. They're concerned about pain and pain control and anxiety and whether you can help them stay out of pain and manage their fears and their fear of pain associated with procedures. They're concerned about time and away from work and other activities. I think that's one of the things that many practices amidst COVID-19 will have to look at, is extending their hours of operation, maybe to include evenings and Saturdays, even as some of you are doing in the simulation, so that people don't have to miss work. They've missed so much work already, they may not be able to afford to miss more work, especially if they don't have a sick leave benefit for being absent. I know this is something the College of Dentistry is considering doing here, maybe possibly Saturday clinical hours or evening hours. Our faculty and students probably won't like that a lot, but we're considering doing it because we've lost 3 months worth of clinical income, and since we're self-generated part of our budget, that's an important thing to consider. And then there's always a money issue, not necessarily how much the treatment costs per se, but how will patients afford to pay for it. So when you think about designing a financial policy for your patients, you need to balance the need to collect what is owed to you, which is a legitimate business purpose. You do a procedure, you ought to be able to be paid for that. You also don't want to appear as though you're just after the money. So you're balancing, I need to collect the money, but I don't want to look like all I care about is the money. So you're trying to do a balancing act. So some issues that relate to this include practice production and profitability, something that you're learning about as you grow your practices in the simulation. Increasing case acceptance among patients is important here too, whether they will agree to the treatment that you provide. I know one of the things we're just really now starting to integrate in our clinics, and maybe you've already integrated these, but we're just really now integrating more on a more consistent basis the use of an intraoral camera for treatment planning and for showing restorations before and after they're placed. And if that's not something you're doing now in the UE clinics, it's certainly something that really increases case acceptance. If people can see that huge crack in that tooth or the hole you need to restore and make that big on a screen, all of a sudden the need to get that done becomes more urgent for them. So if you can show them and make that visual, that makes a big difference. Part of your financial policy needs to be dictated by what is customary in the community. And so if you're practicing in Kingston and the Kingston dentists there make a concerted effort to provide financial arrangements for patients, then you probably better do that too. Making financial policies also needs to take into account your practice cycle, especially as you're growing your business. You may have to make more financial arrangements for patients. And I've encouraged you, and it's no secret in the simulation, I've encouraged all of your practices to have a level 3 or 4 credit policy, because your practice is young and you're growing that practice. And so there's a need then to create an opportunity for patients to have financing, and in the simulation you do that through options 3 or 4. And it also depends a little bit on the economic cycle. I mean, right now with practices just starting back up in the United States, and many people who have lost their jobs, many people who have lost their dental insurance, there's a great need, I would say, right now compared to what it was at the beginning of the year, at least in the US and probably in Jamaica and elsewhere, to provide, because of the economic downturn, more opportunities for patients to have financing than may have existed before. Poor financial policies, or ill-defined ones, or ones that are not implemented, result in lost patronage, and you can lose goodwill from patients. Patients sometimes won't pay the amount that they owe you. Older bills, as we'll talk about, are very hard to collect, and they cost time to collect. You're paying your staff to collect them, so that's cost intensive for you. And you may have to pay billing expenses, postage, and staff. I know that Gordon Christensen, who's a guru in practice management and clinical dentistry, did a study. This is many years ago. I think at that time, don't quote me, but it was a cost of about $12 to $14 to send out a hard copy statement to patients, which is a lot of money. Postage, paper, more importantly, staff time to prepare it and stuff the envelopes and get it in the mail. Inflation also eats away at the value of money that is owed to you, receivables that you haven't received. and you lose interest on that money if you had it and could have invested it. So lots of good reasons to have financial policies and implement them for your patients, so everybody kind of knows what the ground rules are. This is a diagram from the U.S. Department of Commerce that shows how the value of money that is not collected goes down over time. So a dollar that patients owed you after 60 days is really worth about 90 cents, because that's probably what you're going to collect. After 90 days, it's worth about 85 cents. That dollar drops to about 50 cents in 6 months, just because you're not likely to ever get it back. And after a year, it's worth about 30 cents. And after 2 years, worth about 10 cents. So this is called the aging of accounts. And in dentistry, I would say these numbers are probably more like this. So in other words, if you don't collect money from patients within 60 or 90 days, certainly after 4 or 5 months, the chances of you getting that dollar back from that patient that the patient owes you go way, way down, and they go down quickly. So that's all the more reason to have a financial policy in place so that patients know what the rules are and what is owed to the dentist. I'll give you a short story of an alum who I was working with who wanted to buy a practice here in Lincoln, Nebraska. The practice was generating a lot of revenue, about $1 million a year for a single doctor practice. So that's a practice that's doing pretty well, a lot of revenue. However, the accounts receivable in that practice to be healthy would have been about 1/12 of $1 million. So maybe at the most, those accounts receivable should have been $80 to $100 or $120,000. And as our student was looking at that practice, I had him bring in some financial information from the practice. And lo and behold, the accounts receivable for that office were about $500,000. Money that had not been collected, that was just like $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 more than it should have been. And so his top priority in acquiring that practice had to be fixing the problem of accounts receivable by defining a new financial policy for the office, training the staff on implementing that policy, and getting that money that was owed to the practice back to the practice. I think he ended up basically writing off about $250,000 because some of those bills that were owed to the dentist were down here a year or 2 years old, and he was just never going to get that money. And so he just basically gave up trying. Financial arrangements need to be made for new patients, for emergency patients, regular patients of the practice, and long-term patients who have not had significant work done previously. For example, let's suppose Leah has her own general practice in Kingston there 5 years from now. You have to have a policy for emergency patients. If that patient calls up with an emergency, what's the policy? If you have to go into your office, which you would, to see them, if you can't do a teledentistry consult, you could maybe do that. But if you can't, you have to go to your office. You probably have to have a staff member join you for legal reasons and to have a witness there. That's costing you money. You have to leave your family for that evening. You have to have the assistant leave her family for the evening. So the question is, how are you going to have the patient pay for that emergency care? So, for example, a policy for emergency patients could be this. For existing patients, you don't charge them anything. It's just you're going to make them bill them afterward within 30 days and expect them to make a payment. If it's a new patient, someone you've never seen, my advice would be that they have to pay you upfront in cash or a credit card, and you can choose the amount, whatever it is, $50, $75, but those are the kind of situations that you plan for with a financial policy. Front desk collections, you need to ask for payment at the time of service and expect payment at the time of service. For some reason, dental patients sometimes, at least here in the States, and I assume there too, think that dentistry is different than like getting the oil changed on your car. If I go down to my mechanic shop and have my oil changed on my Honda CRV today, guess what? They expect to be paid today. You know, it's a service that was provided that day and they expect payment at that time. So most practices that are well run will have as a goal a percentage of production collected on a given day. For example, we're going to collect 35% of all the production today before the patient leaves, or 40% or 30%, and then they will manage their policy toward that goal. You want to make it convenient for patients to pay at the time of service. It's ideal to have a private area to discuss finances that's kind of cordoned off through glass or a separate room. You have to have a counter for writing checks, pens for writing checks, and then if you're going to make other financial arrangements such as working with banks or credit cards, then you want to communicate that to the patients as well, and encourage immediate payment as much as you can. So how can you encourage immediate payment from patients? You can encourage cash payments, and for the patient's portion of the bill, remember there may be an insurance portion too, you can provide a cash payment discount, maybe of 5% or 10%. Senior citizens, Kathy and I now start to get some of these discounts. You can get 5% patient portion discount or 5% additional for cash. Managed care, of course, if you're in insurance, there's an adjustment there, automatic with those plans. And friends and family sometimes will have a discounted procedure discount. Very often in a dental practice, for example, you could have in your policy manual that immediate family members of your staff only have to pay for the lab bill for a procedure. Otherwise, that's considered a benefit for your staff, which staff and their family obviously appreciate. So that's one of the ways you can reach out to your team members. Front desk collections can include cash payments, personal checks, charge cards, patient insurance plans. Want to account for all cash on the computer, try to prevent embezzlement. This has tax implications. Later on, you're going to have a case in the simulation where a patient gives you cash chairside, and then you're stuck with the dilemma of whether you're going to report that or not, or just pocket that money and adjust it off. So that's a tax implication issue. You'll want to have change available, a small amount of change in the office. You don't want to have a whole bunch there because you don't want to get robbed. And you want to remove cash at the end of the day from the office. Take that home or maybe have secured in a safe on site. You have to make a decision about personal checks. You don't have to accept those, but if you do, that has to be done equitably, right? So that you're not discriminating against anybody. And you have to maintain individual confidentiality for their financial information, even as you have to do that for their health-related information. You may not realize this as a consumer, but every time you go shopping at the Sovereign Center there in Ligony and go into a retail store, let's say you go in and you buy a new charger for your cell phone, you know, if you use your credit card, that retailer takes a chunk of money loss when you use that credit card. It varies sometimes between 1% and 5%. That varies on the credit card. But for example, if you charge $1 for something, that retailer is going to pay a fee basically of $2 to the credit 2 cents to the credit card, and then really get 98 cents on the dollar or 97 cents. So this depends on the financial vendor who's holding that card, how much is being billed, and the average size of the case for the dentistry that you're doing. This is usually accounted for as a bank charge on your profit and loss statement, and it needs to be balanced with your collection ratio, because this is money really that you can't collect. It's kind of like a discount, and so you have to keep that into account when you're tracking how much money you're collecting. Use of credit cards encourages payment. We're in a credit card kind of society. You can also establish an easy pay method similar to a hotel pre-charge. For example, if you've got a big case, maybe you start that case and ask for 30% down when you start that case. Sometimes if you've ever gone to a resort, you may have to pay one night for the hotel in advance. So that's kind of a similar parallel to dentistry. Office insurance collections need to know your patient's insurance policies. Right now, at least in the United States, there's real-time information available through software that'll tell you what a patient's benefits are. Very important information and worth the money to subscribe to that service. Otherwise, your staff, they're getting on the phone, they're calling the insurance company to see if the patient qualifies for benefits, and you're going to spend more time paying your staff than it would to subscribe to those kind of services. Need to track your paperwork and have follow-up with insurance. Sometimes insurance benefits are denied. At least in the United States, approximately 90 to 92% of all dental claims that are submitted electronically are automatically paid through artificial intelligence means. In other words, a human being doesn't even look at them. They're just automatically paid. Then another 8% or 10% may be reviewed by a dental assistant or a dentist before they're paid. Need to decide assignment of benefits. Anybody know what this means? Okay, so we'll talk just a minute about that. So assignment of benefits is this. If you're signed up with a dental insurance company, so for example, we'll just use Emeritus, which is a big insurance company here in Lincoln, Nebraska. They're housed here, employ a lot of people. If I am a dentist and I am contracted in a preferred provider program, which means I've agreed to accept a discounted fee for my services, let's say it's 80% like in the simulation, I bill the insurance company on behalf of the patient. Almost all dentists will do that. Then the question is, when the insurance pays their portion, where does that check go to, or where does that electronic deposit go to? You have the choice as the dentist of having that check or electronic deposit go into your account or be sent to you, or allow that check or electronic deposit to go to the patient. That's called assignment of benefits. In other words, there's money coming in, and then the question is, whose pocket does it go into? So I would strongly encourage you to always have assignment of benefits that go directly to you, because if they go to the patient, what might happen? They may not pay you. So you want that insurance company to pay you, so you make sure at least you have that money that's coming to you from the insurance company. All right. So that's assignment of benefits. You want to submit your claims every day if you can, and through electronic means, through batching. You may be familiar with dental service organizations in the United States. These are big corporations that own hundreds of dental practices. So for example, Pacific Dental Services, which has huge market shares in California and the Southwest, they now own 850 individual dental practices. Huge corporation. Guess what? They know how to submit claims. They take those claims for insurance every single day from all 850 dental practices. They centrally compile them and they ship them off for payment, and they'll get paid within a matter of a few days in the vast majority of cases that they submit. So submit claims daily. Use pre-treatment estimates to see if an insurance company will pay for a given procedure or not. So for example, a pre-treatment estimate in my case, I'm a clincher at night, okay? Unconscious, I'm not consciously, chewing on my teeth, but I do it. So, and actually about probably 30 or 50% of the population does it. So I'm probably not alone in the Zoom room doing that. So a few years ago, I was going to get a new night guard, right? So that when I do clench, I'm not grinding down my teeth and ruining them. So my dentist sent to my insurance company a pre-treatment estimate saying, if I have a new night guard, will the insurance pay for it? And if they will pay for it, how much will they pay for it? So when you're dealing with big cases, or if money is really tight, you can contact the insurance company through your staff and get a pre-treatment estimate to see if they're going to pay for something or not. Credit policy needs to establish who doesn't have to pay cash at the time of service. Maybe you give a grace period for existing patients. Needs to be probably the same policy, or by procedure. and who gets interest-free loans from patients. At least in the United States, if you begin making financial arrangements where you're essentially loaning money and charging interest, then you're subject to to Credit Act legislation and a federal law, and probably don't want to get into that. Probably better to have a financial policy in place without interest that they owe you, because you probably don't want to become a banker. You better to have a relationship with a banker that the patient deals with than for you to be the bank. Collection policy needs to establish how you'll collect the money owed and not paid, for example, over 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Credit policy. In the simulation, easy, this is on a scale of 1 to 4. Easy is a level 4. Then we drop down here like to a 3, then a 2, then a 1, which is a tight credit policy. As we'll talk about in chapter 12, and this is one of those numbers that is just astonishing to me, and I think there's even a quiz question over it, so you can be prepared for that one. But practices that operate with the simulation option 1 compared to practices that operate with a simulation option 4. So on the two extremes of that credit collection policy in the simulation. Practices that operate with that level 4 policy compared to these generate twice as much revenue per year. Let me state that again. If you operate with a loose financial policy for patients, you will generate twice as much revenue, all things being equal, compared to a practice that has tight, no financial policy arrangements for patients. So a level 1 is, I do a crown, I want the payment right now, and I want it today. We're not making any financial arrangements for patients, as opposed to doing a crown saying, I want a third on the day I prep and temporize it, then I want a third more on the day that I seed it, then I want a third the rest of the payment within 45 days, pick a number. But these practices here grow much more slowly, and they only generate half as much revenue. So for example, in the simulation, that's why I'm encouraging you to have a looser policy in the simulation. All of the things being equal, a practice here may generate $500,000 a year in dentistry. This practice here only generates $250,000 in dentistry. And certainly this practice is going to have higher accounts receivable, but they've got a whole lot more money coming in. This practice will have no much issue at all with accounts receivable, but the amount of money that they're bringing in is just a whole lot less. So I would rather have more patients owe me money here and have a bigger pot of money than a smaller pot of money here, right? And have nobody owe me anything. It's kind of a philosophy of practice you need to just think about. Decisions on your credit policy. Will credit be given to patients at all? Which patients will not be given credit? Will you use credit reports to qualify patients? You can get credit reports from patients if you have a release from them to that. Who decides who gets the credit and who doesn't? Who will discuss and make financial arrangements with patients? What payment plans will be offered, if any? What down payment is required? And is there interest or any finance charge? And again, I would encourage you not to get into the banking business and start charging patients, especially since you can make arrangements with a local bank, usually for the patient to get a loan from the bank and make the payments to the bank. Extended payment plans can be computer generated, usually should be written and signed by the patient. Copies should be given to the patient and stored in their original paper chart or in their electronic record. You can consider using a health credit card or bank plans, and you probably want to set limits around these in terms of what kind of extended payments you're willing to make for patients. These numbers probably these days could be a little higher, maybe less than $300 or $350. You don't make any arrangements, and these numbers and brackets could go higher based on inflation. You may be aware of patient financial plans. So here are just several that are listed that are available in the States, and more are emerging. So the websites are there if you wanted to look those up. So again, this would be a part of having a level 3 or a level 4 financial policy so that the patients can go through a third party like Care Credit and pay for their dental care. Collection policies for normal accounts. Usually you're going to send statements. Hopefully you'll have a software in place where that can be done through email these days and save time and money. Letters are usually used for problem accounts, patients who haven't paid. Telephone is usually more effective for problem accounts, but these days people screen so much of their phone calls, I'm not sure that that's going to be very effective these days. If they have caller ID, and they probably do, right, on their phone, and they see it's the dentist calling, they may not pick up. So decide a process for how you're going to process your statements. You're going to do that every day. You're going to do that at the close of the month, multiple times per month. Again, probably doing that daily or weekly is better. I found, just based on my own personal experience, that dentists are much more sophisticated in getting their statements out than say physicians by and large are. I have glaucoma in my eyes, and I went to our medical center in Omaha about 18 months ago, and it took 3 months before I was billed. I couldn't make a payment if I wanted to because I didn't know what I owed the doctor and the clinic. That's just kind of ridiculous. I mean, to wait 3 months as a patient, what that means, the accounts receivable for that ophthalmology practice is going to run 3 months to 4 months late all the time and be a huge amount of money. Need to decide who gets billed, minimum account size. Maybe you don't want to send any bills if they're below a certain threshold. I had a friend who was once sent a letter from our Internal Revenue Service, the federal tax people, and he was sent a bill, and it was something like he owed $2.50. And they sent a bill to him to pay a $2.50 bill. I mean, that's just silly because it probably took $25 to generate that bill for $2.50. So maybe if your bill, the amount owed by the patient is less than maybe $5 or $10, maybe you just tell the patient our financial policies, we're just going to leave that on the books and you can pay that next time you have a procedure done. May not be worth the time or staff time to generate that kind of a bill. Need to keep track of insurance copays and deductibles. This is what the patient has to pay before the benefits kick in. Usually for dentistry, that's maybe $50 or $100. Patient has to pay before the insurance starts paying their portion. And you need to define aged accounts. That was that graph of how money is worth less and less and less over time. And certainly you want to try to integrate electronic billing if you can. For delinquent accounts, you want to define what those look like. Keep track of how old those accounts are. Again, the longer you wait to collect your money, the less money you'll collect. Keep track of risk management issues. Some patients who you go after because they haven't paid their bill may sue you, even if you've not done anything wrong. And delinquent accounts also represent a failure of the patient to pay and also a failure of your office financial policy. If they know up front what the rules are, most patients will be more likely to pay you. There are a variety of reasons to pursue delinquent accounts to get the money that's owed you. It has ramifications for your relationships with patients. You may want to go after a patient who hasn't paid you just because you want them to leave the practice. If that's the case, I would probably just send them a formal certified letter dismissing them from the practice rather than suing them for the money that they owe you. Sometimes you can avoid a lawsuit through collections, pursuing delinquent accounts. Sometimes you might get a lawsuit because you do that. It may give you a sense of personal satisfaction to have people who haven't paid you required to pay you for a certain sense of vengeance. I'm not sure if that's all that healthy, but it can give you that satisfaction to get that money. You can turn your collection issues over to collection agencies. They charge a lot of money. This is one of the reasons that aged accounts are not worth much, because once you send them to a collection agency, the agency is going to collect more money than you do. At least in the States, you can take the patient to small claims court, but that has some public relations issues. I'm not sure if it's worth it. You know, If they owe you $200, not sure if it's worth your stress to go after that or not. You'll have issues with attorneys and having to pay them. There are also services you can go through to sell your accounts receivable. You have to decide whether you want to use those or not. One last point about accounts receivable. Usually when you acquire a practice, several of you are interested in acquiring a practice. One of the big discussion items and items for negotiation is whether you should buy the accounts receivable or not. In most cases, it's recommended that you not do that. And so in the simulation, you did not buy Dr. Old's money owed to him. Usually you're better off just to have a line of credit as you do in the simulation to borrow from to pay your bills as you need it. Collecting money owed to the previous doctor can be difficult. You have to pay your staff to do that. And if you do purchase the accounts receivable from the previous doctor, then that needs to be discounted because you need to account for your time and your staff's time to collect that money. And so that might be if the previous doctor had $100,000 in accounts receivable, you may say, okay, doc, I'll collect this money, but I'm only going to give you $70,000 or $80,000 to collect that. Because again, it takes you time to collect it and some of it you will never get. Okay, so that's our PowerPoint for today on patient financial policies. Thought I had our VLE up here and I'm not seeing it. Okay. Okay, I should have just shared our VLE with you, did I? Did that come through?
Yes, we're seeing it.
Okay, good. So I wanted to give you additional information beyond what was in the PowerPoint. This additional information is not going to be quizzed over or tested over. I'm just giving you supplemental resources for your future dental practice. So if you scroll down here, which I'm doing, and you can see here, I also copied and pasted the background information for each of those PowerPoints into RVLE. So again, you don't have to log into the simulation website. You can grab that background information here if you'd rather grab it here. It's available in both locations. If you drop down to topic number 8 in our VLE for this course, I have posted for you a separate PowerPoint, which we're not going to go over. So you can breathe a sigh of relief. We're not going to do that. But here's a separate PowerPoint on why financial arrangements are important for patients. This was provided by Dr. Gene Heller, who for about the last 15 years was vice president of Henry Schein and was the leader of their practice transition division and been a colleague and friend of mine for many years. And he basically just said, whenever I teach, I can use his stuff whenever. So I've got his permission to give this to you. So you may want to download this at some point. In addition to that, this document, Patient Financial Policy Acknowledgement, let me see if it'll open for me. All right. Do I need to share that again or did it pop up?
We can see it.
Okay, good. All right, so this is just a sample policy statement that you could give to your patient saying, here is our financial policy at a big level, all right? We're not going to get into the very specific points of that financial policy. It's simply there for patients to read so that they understand what the general rules are for your financial policy. So they read that, or you read it to them, and then they sign off that they have read it. It doesn't mean they agree to it. It's just the fact that you're telling them we have a financial policy and this is what that policy is, generally speaking. Okay, are we back to our VLE? Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, good, it's working. All right, thank you. The other item I gave you is this financial policy worksheet. So this is a document that's about 3 or 4 or 5 pages long. I can't remember exactly how long it is, but this is something for you to download, put in a practice management folder for future use. I'm not even going to open it and show it to you. This is an appendix in chapter 12 of the transition textbook. So I just took the file from the book and downloaded it here. So this is a working template for you to fill out for your practice for your financial policies. It's going to say, what happens to an emergency patient when they come in? Do they owe me any money? Are they a patient of record? No, then they don't have to pay. If they're not a patient of record, then they do owe me. And then you put in your policy what they owe you. They owe you $50, $75, $100. It's up to you to set those policies. Also included in here would be issues related to auto accidents. And how do you deal with kids who are from families that are divorced? Who's responsible for the bill? You have to set those rules up so that people know what those rules are. If you're doing a big case that involves lab work, what does the payment structure look like? Are you going to require a third on the day of the prep, or half on the day of the prep when you set it off to lab? Or how are you going to handle that, and when is the balance due? And so you define each of those things through this worksheet. And again, we're not going to take the time right now to go through this. I'm just saying, here it is, and you can use that for your future use, all right? So grab that at some point for your future use. All right, so let's see, are we all here now? Ashley, how are you?
Dr. Dunning, I'm not too bad.
Are you live?
Yeah.
You're kind of with us, okay? All right, so I think I decided before we dive into quarter 2 and review that and have consults, what I want to do for the next hour is have you develop draft goals for your simulated practice. So on RVLE, I think I'm still sharing. Go to RVLE, 1 person per practice. Well, you can both grab this so you can both see it since you're not sitting side by side. Everybody go to RVLE, and under topic 3, right here, you have a strategic plan document. So open that up and save it. And I'm going to have you get together through FaceTime or however you want to get together to develop your goals for the simulation. As you develop those goals, and we'll spend about an hour today and then maybe about an hour tomorrow finishing them. So my goal today is by 10:15 to have you have rough drafts for each of these goals done. And then we'll digest quarter 2 and later today, and then tomorrow you can finalize your plans. You may want to tweak them based on Q2's results, but the idea is to develop these goals for today in rough draft form and then finalize them tomorrow. Let me see if I can bring these up, one of these up. So all right, so I should be sharing with you now what you just downloaded, strategic plan. These are your goals for your practice. So put your practice name up here and your practice number here. So just type in whatever your practice number name is and your practice number. And then for each of these variables, this column here, which is the Q12 result, we leave blank because we don't know what the Q12 result is going to be. So this whole column is going to be blank, all right? So for each of these variables on the left, you're going to enter numbers. And for each number that you enter, you'll describe strategies to achieve those goals. On RVLE, you have a document, I think it's in topic 3, key strategies to achieve goals in the simulation. So you want to open key strategies to achieve your goals. And so for each of these, you're going to forecast where you're going to be at the end of the simulation. So we can walk through each of these together, kind of as an overview, and then I'll have you meet with your practices. So for example, you bought a practice from Dr. Old in Q0. The last 3 months before you acquired the practice, he had 959 patient visits. So I want you to ask yourself, what's a realistic goal at the end of 3 years in Q12, again at the end line, after Q12, how many patients do you think your practice can have? There's a benchmarks document. Most practices in the simulation will have between 1,100 and as many as 2,000 or 2,200 patients at the end of the simulation in Q12. So I'm asking here for that snapshot in Q12, how many patients just for that quarter, not how many combined for the whole simulation, but in Q12. So for example, you might say, I think we can grow that practice and almost double what Dr. Old did, and we're gonna have 1,500 patients. So we're going to take his 959, we're going to increase it basically by 50%, roughly. And in order to do that, we're going to accept all managed care at full to have more patients. We're going to increase advertising. And we're going to try to have unique hours, like Saturdays, evenings. And we're going to take 1 more CE day a year than required. Remember, right now you have to take 3 CE days. So to build up patient demand for services, you're going to exceed that and take 1 more CE. So for each of these goals, you're going to describe at least 3 or 4 strategies, as I did here, of how you're going to achieve that. Okay? Similarly, you'll say, okay, we want, in a healthy practice, we want to have at least 1 new patient per day, business day that we're open. And so we're going to say, okay, in a typical quarter, there's like 65 business days, so we're going to set a goal of 70. Or you could set a goal of 90 or 100 or 120. And for strategies, you could say all of the above, what you just defined. Plus, do market research to make sure we are competitive in advertising. So you want to track that. So that could be a sub goal or sub strategy there. Capacity utilization. How many patients are in the chair on a percentage basis versus how many appointments were available? I would recommend that this number be 90 or above. Some of your practices in Q2, if you've already looked, we had 2 or 3 practices that were at 100% capacity, right? So in other words, out of 100 appointments, there were 100 patients in the chair. So I'd set that at 90% or above. And again, you'll outline strategies. Some of these strategies are going to repeat for each of these categories. So in this case, you may want to also make sure we have adequate staffing at the front desk that would do things like confirming appointments. In this category, and I'm going to give you time to develop these. So this category, you may remember for Medicaid, there's 7% of the population that's Medicaid. There's 41% of the population that's PPO, and there's 70% or 7% of the population that is in capitation. So combined, that's 55% of the population. So my question here is, as a percentage of your gross production before you make adjustments for insurance, how much percent do you want from each of these categories? And these aren't right or wrong answers. This is just what kind of a practice do you want to have? So if you want to simply mirror or be exactly the same as the rest of the market, then it would be 7% Medicaid, 41% PPO, 7% capitation. But maybe you want to accept more Medicaid or less. Maybe you want to accept more PPO or less, or maybe you want to accept more or less capitation. And so you need to think about the fact that this is going to reimburse you at 65% of your fees, this at 80%, and this at about 78%. And I checked that number yesterday in the simulation, and it was running at about 76%, a little over 76%. So I'll adjust that for Q3. So the question is, how much managed care do you want involved in your practice? 54 out of 100 patients are in managed care. So of those 100 patients, I'm asking, how much do you want involved in these third-party or managed care programs? And again, these aren't right or wrong answers. And then for each of these, you'd have a strategy here. So for example, you could say, I want 5% Medicaid. And to get 5% Medicaid at the end, we're going to accept full Medicaid through the quarters until it reaches 10%. And then when it reaches 10%, we're cutting it off. And then we're going to continue to grow our other patients from the other plans and for fee for service. And then by Q12, it should be about 5%. Maybe you want your PPO to be 45 or 50%. And if that's the case, you're going to take full PPO throughout the whole game. That's your strategy. Maybe you don't want any capitation, so you put 0. Well, then you might say, well, we're going to take capitation for the first year, then we're going to put it on hold, and then in year 3, we're going to 0 it out and take none. So for each of these, there'd be a strategy. So this is your gross production number, where you expect to be in Q12. I wouldn't make this overly complicated. If you think you're going to grow the practice by 50%, I would take Dr. Old's $110,000 or whatever he was generating and multiply it by 50%. Or maybe you want to do something with your fees, and maybe we can take Dr. Old's practice and increase it. We could say we're going to grow that practice to $175,000 in gross production. And in addition to the above, raise fees at least 5% each year. So that would be an additional strategy to increase gross production in addition to everything else. And realizing that your billable or net production is less than your gross production based on how many patients you want from these programs. We might say, well, we're going to expect now this net production, or what we can actually bill, because we're going to have a lot of managed care, this is going to drop to 155,000. Because again, we're going to have adjustments from the managed care, and we expect to collect, of that 155,000, we expect to collect, let's say, expect a high collection ratio for what we can collect. So we're going to collect 150,000. And for strategies here, we might say maintain a level 4 credit collection policy. Through quarter 11, and then move to level 3 quarter 12. Or you might say keep it a level 4 throughout. Credit collection policy would also have to do with acquiring new patients up here and attracting new patients here. So you could put that up above. Loan balance. You started off the game with about $260,000 in debt. My guess is after quarter 2, most of you are probably at about 330 to 350. So maybe a realistic goal here might be 250,000. Or maybe if you just make regular payments, it might be 300,000. So if you have anything less than around 300,000, you'd say make extra payments with cash when available. If you're going to say our debt's going to be about 300,000, we're just going to, for that strategy, we would just make regular payments. Overhead, again, is how many cents out of 100 cents does it cost you to bring in the dentistry that you're doing? How much does it cost you to provide that service? So most overheads are between 60 and 70%. You may forecast a little higher or lower. Remember, Dr. Clean yesterday was at 55%. So in other words, 55 cents out of every dollar he collects is going to pay for staff and lab and supplies and rent and marketing and so forth. And for this, you might put for strategy, monitor how efficient our staff, or just monitor staff efficiency. And try to control costs as best as you can. Profit then is the opposite of that. So if you're going to forecast 55% overhead, then your profit would be 45%. So on RVLE, there's also a sample one of these that's completed. We went over that yesterday in class, but I just wanted to walk through this with you. So for you right now, let's take the next 45 minutes and begin working on these goals and your strategies to achieve them. We'll do rough drafts today, and then we'll digest quarter 2, and you may have a better understanding of the numbers and then may want to adjust those, and we'll finalize these plans tomorrow, and I'll just have you email me those plans tomorrow. But we'll do rough drafts today and then final drafts tomorrow. Questions people have before you get off on your groups and FaceTime or whatever to work on these?
Yes. Could you repeat what the overhead is?
Sure. So overhead is the cost that your total costs of your practice versus how much revenue you're bringing in. So for example, in the simulation right now, most practices have more costs than they have revenue, than they have money coming in. So your overhead is actually over 100%. It may be 100 or 110 or 120%. But at some point, you're going to start having more money come in. Your costs probably won't go down. Your costs will probably go up. But overhead is the cost of doing business on a percentage basis. So when you pay your staff, if you get out quarter 1 or quarter 2 results, overhead are all those numbers on the left side of the first page that says total costs. So when you
Okay.
add up, let's say your practice had $100,000 in revenue. Then the question is, of that $100,000, how much money did you spend to earn the 100,000? That's overhead. So if you spent 90,000 to earn 100, your overhead's 90%. If you spent 50,000 to earn 100,000, then the overhead's 50%. If you spent
Okay.
if you spent 120,000 to earn 100,000, your overhead would be 120%, and your profit would be minus 20. But we don't expect that to happen for any of you. All right. Other questions? Gervais, you want to go ahead and stay in your own group?
Yeah, I'm good.
Oh, can you handle it? You can be
Yeah.
you can be the boss. You don't have to compromise. So I guess that's a good thing. All right, so I'll go ahead and stay here on Zoom. I don't think we need to get into the breakout rooms for this. However, if you have a question, why don't you just, if it's a question you think everybody wants to hear, just go ahead and ask it and I'll answer it for everybody. If it's a private question about your own strategy in developing this, then you can just private chat with me, okay?
Okay.
And then this will be worth 5% of the grade for the course that I turn in. And so I can't tell you what your strategy should be or what your numbers over here should be. But again, I would you can refer to the benchmarks document if you want some general guidelines about where these numbers may be. I've given you some numbers you could use here. I would try not to overcomplicate this. I would probably get out Dr. Old's quarter 0, which I think is in topic 2 on our VLE. See where his numbers were. And if you think you can double what he did, I would just take his numbers and double them. Does that kind of make sense? I mean, if he had 950 patients or 1,000 patients, you think you can do twice as good as he can, and given a favorable economy, you probably could. Then you could just say, okay, we're going to get 2,000 patients. So think about how aggressive you want to be in terms of strategies, how competitive you want to be, and go from there. And then I would just take whatever his numbers were and kind of just do the simple math. Again, if he was at 1,000 patients and you want to increase by 50%, say, okay, we're going to have 1,500. If he had 60 new patients, you think, oh, I think we can do 50% better. That would be 60 times 1.5. That's 90 new patients. So I'd try to keep that simple. Okay. Utilization wouldn't change. You're not going to increase that over 100%, obviously, right? Okay, so if you've got questions, I'll be watching chat. Just as a reminder, as you work on those goals, keep in mind that you will not be graded on whether you meet the goals or not. You will be graded at the end of the simulation on how well you are able to explain how you met them or how you didn't. In other words, if you say you're going to get 1,200 patients and you get 2,000, I'm going to ask you to explain how did you do that or how'd that happen, right? So you do get a grade on how these goals are defined, you know, that 5% and your strategies for achieving those goals. But the actual achievement of them is not graded, but your ability to explain how they were met or not will be graded.